Welcome back to another episode of the Casey Campbell Podcast. Casey Campbell with you, of course. Pleased to be joined by one, the only Bob Pockrass of Fox Sports, covers NASCAR. Of course, getting ready for this weekend's Daytona 500 and, of course, the beginning of the NASCAR season for all three series. Hello, Bob.
Hey Casey, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Well, first off, another season is upon us. There's a ton of big storylines across the top three series as well as ARCA. What are some of the biggest storylines heading into 2024 for NASCAR?
Yeah, well, I think first off for NASCAR, you talk about what they spend their off season doing. They spent looking at the short track and road course aero package and trying to get the racing better on those tracks. Did they find anything that worked? Well, we'll see. They changed the underbody of the car, increased the size of the splitter from 2 to 3 inches. So, there's possibility there could be some difference. The goal is to try to have a little bit more ability for the drivers to maneuver through traffic. So if they didn't really reduce the downforce all that much, but they hope that by shifting where the downforce force occurs, that drivers will have more ability to make a pass. And I think that's just, you're talking about nearly now half the tracks are road courses or short tracks. So they've got to get that right. And then I think when you look at the schedule for the year, you have Iowa, and then you also have kind of change in the first round where you not only have the regular season finish at Darlington instead of Daytona, but now also Atlanta and Watkins Glen are in that opening round. And man, anything can happen in
Yeah,
those. So I don't know that the regular season champ will be safe.
yeah. Of course, with the 500 this week, we saw that NY. I know you've been talking about possibly NY Racing entering a car. On the entry list, they did. Obviously, Biffle announced yesterday that he was not going to be in the 44. Will we see that car in the 500? Do they have another driver, or do we just not know yet?
I mean, they have a hauler. As far as I know, they have a car. They haven't announced a driver yet, but usually, if you have a car, somebody will get into it. So and we'll see hauler parking is later today, and again, they're entered. So and until they withdraw, I mean, unless they withdraw, I would assume that they're going to be here.
Okay. In terms of with I know you talked about the package and all that. Are there going to be any more tests, to test the short track package in the next few weeks or the rest of the season or
There
anything?
won't be any tests. The drivers will get an extra practice at Phoenix like they did last year in the spring to work on that package. Also, last year they got an extra practice at Circuit of the Americas. Whether they get that practice again this year is still to be determined.
Yeah. In terms of, with I know obviously the big story also one of the off seasons besides, with the fixing the package is with the charter agreement and all that stuff. Are we where are we at in that process? Do you think we may have a deal at some point? I know obviously the contract's up in 2025, but could we see a deal possibly any earlier or, during at some point this season?
Yeah, I think there'll be a deal at some point this season. It's up after this year, going into 2025. Now, you talk to Brad Keselowski, he says, well, it really doesn't have to get done until next February. But you talk to most of the other owners, and obviously they want it done sooner than later. But I don't think it's going to happen all that soon. I think they'll get through Daytona, and then they'll probably, I would think, have more negotiations, and I think they obviously they'd love to have it by, well, obviously they would love to already have it done, but I think probably summer is probably the most logical time for it to get done.
Yeah. I know there was a lot of topics about this, especially with the forecast and all that stuff. With how the LA Clash worked and, with possibly rain in the forecast at some point this weekend. Um, do you think we'll see something like NASCAR doing what they did with the Clash, moving in a day before, or do you think we'll see the weighted out approach or something like that in terms of, trying to
I,
figure out if rain delays happen or not?
yeah, I mean, certainly with the forecast for this week, the rain is supposed to come Saturday, right? And be out at some point Sunday. Of course, we're talking on Tuesday, so forecast could be totally different
Right.
in 4 days. But I really look at the decision at the Clash as an anomaly. I, the Clash was at a temporary facility. They only had a few days to get it done before they had to tear it up. And I think that poses a whole different set of challenges compared to a facility that you could always come back to. So I would not, I mean, never say never, but and again, like, if you were talking like the regular season finale at Darlington or something where you felt like you had to get it in within a certain number of days in order to keep your playoff kind of the way you wanted them, then maybe you would see a decision like that. But I think what you saw at the Clash can be very, very rare. I think NASCAR will still go pretty much with, hey, if we're going to wait and if we have to move it up, if we want to move it up an hour or so, move it up. And if not, and if the race gets postponed, then we'll go to the next available day. So I just don't, it kind of, there were a lot of things that worked in NASCAR's favor at the Clash, including that Fox already had a lengthy window at on Saturday on FS1
Right.
for the heats. So it pretty much was able to kind of just plug that in there without a lot of disruption to the schedules.
Yeah. I know a lot of the talk last season was, with scheduling and all that stuff, with the international races. Do you think we could see something like we didn't? I know we didn't see, I know we were close to possibly putting one on the schedule in 2024, but could we possibly have one in 2025?
I think it's quite possible. I thought it was going to be possible in 2024. Teams were kind of scrambling at one point to make sure everybody had their passports or had started the passport process at one point last year, thinking that Montreal was going to happen. Obviously didn't. So, what will 2025 have in store? Do they try to negotiate more with Montreal and see if they can go there? Does the Clash or another race go to Mexico? I think there's certainly possibilities. Obviously, NASCAR is willing to negotiate and wait for the deal that's right before they say, "Hey, we're going to do it."
Yeah. I know this question's probably going to get asked to you at some point this season. But what are some of the names that to watch out for in terms of contracts up at the end of the year, if we know any as of right now? I know the season's just starting, but
Well, I think, well, the biggest one's Martin Truex Jr., right? That's been the same one
yep,
the last couple of years. So, and he told me I'm going to be asking him a lot about his contract because he doesn't plan on making a decision anytime soon. So I think he's kind of the main one. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., defending Daytona 500 champion. At least a couple Priest over at Stewart Haas is up. And I know we like to talk about contracts, but I mean, I think you look at a guy like Daniel Suarez, who's theoretically good through next year, but Trackhouse has Shane Van Gisbergen, they have Zane Smith waiting in the wings. Are they going to be able to buy enough charters to fulfill all of their contracts, or they have to buy somebody out, or what are the release clauses in them? So, just because you have a contract doesn't really mean that you're definitely going to have a ride throughout. Harrison Burton, I guess, would probably be another one of those who's up after this year, who I think a lot of people say, like, man, he really needs to step it up, or else he could be looking for another ride.
yeah. I know a lot of there's a lot of questions with a lot of teams. The Stewart Haas Racing has obviously been a big topic of conversation the last few years. I know you just talked about it in an article a few days ago, but what's the situation with that team, and what could we see possibly? Could we see some big changes over there?
Yeah, I mean, look, their Ford deal is not done for beyond 2024. That deal is pretty significant. They've been a four-car team. I think you saw them at some of the media days where their suits weren't all that full with sponsors. Obviously, they lost Anheuser-Busch. They lost Smithfield after last year, so that was a big hit. Now, Kevin Harvick's salary and Eric Almirola's salary versus John Berry or Josh Berry's salary and Noah Gregson's salary probably is a pretty big difference too. So you're I don't know that they need to fill all that money lost, but certainly some of it. So they're in if they don't get the money they got from Ford previously, I think they're gonna, when you talk about teams looking to potentially downsize or sell some charters, I think you gotta consider Stewart Haas because, are they gonna keep would Tony and Gene continue to run teams out of their own pocket? So I
Right.
think, we talk about this now, but if they go out and win 4 or 5 races in the first 12 or 16, then all these discussions about sponsorship and potential manufacturer support can change. So, I think it's a little bit of wait and see, at least early in the year. But I think everybody there knows that Stuart Haas kind of in a little bit of in a little bit of limbo, like any team would be when your manufacturer deal isn't done yet.
I know we talked about a lot of big stories in the Cup Series, but so far. But what are some of the other big storylines to kind of look at in terms of driver wise, heading into 2024?
Are you you want me to talk about the Xfinity series?
Xfinity
When
and
you look
trucks. I know
at
we kind of
driver
covered
wise,
Cup, but yeah,
yeah,
let's do maybe Xfinity.
sure. I mean, well, Xfinity, obviously, I think you look at two drivers there, Shane Van Gisbergen, and how he is going to do with his full-time NASCAR ride and the transition to ovals. Yeah, he had great time at IRP in the truck, and so I think he's looking forward to it, but certainly it'll be a challenge. Then you have Haley Deegan, who'll be a rookie in Xfinity, and what is she going to be able to do after pretty much an uninspiring few seasons in the truck. So I think those two drivers will definitely be the ones to watch. As far as like really wondering what they do, and then you look at all the drivers in that series who've changed teams. You have Sammy Smith going from Gibbs over to JRM. You have Chandler Smith going from Calling over to Gibbs. So you've had Sheldon Creed go from RCR over to Gibbs, and Jesse Love replacing him at RCR. So a lot of interesting storylines there in Xfinity. And in truck, I would say some of the more intriguing storylines are Grant Enfinger, new team, or going to a new team at CR7 Motorsports after the close of GMS. You have speaking of the close of GMS, you have Raja Caruth going to Spire, and what is Spire going to be now that they've bought Kyle Busch Motorsports? And just how strong and what the transition will be like for those teams and drivers who came from the KBM stable. And then I think you also be looking at a rookie in Lane Riggs at front row, what he does with that opportunity. And the kind of the other end of the spectrum, you have Ty Dillon, a veteran driver now in the truck series over at the 25.
Yeah. I know you mentioned Spire. Obviously, they made a lot of big stories and in headlines and stuff. Of course, they'll be having 3 Cup cars, and then of course, three trucks. Well, 4 if you count the Rev truck.
I count them four.
Yeah. Okay, but so what's what's that team gonna be? What do you feel like Spire's gonna do this year? Because it's one of the probably most interesting teams in NASCAR right now because with big plans, big expansions, and signing a lot of young drivers to their team.
Yeah, expansion's never easy, so I'm not going to say they're going to be great. I think Corey LaJoy will, be made a few spots better. I think Carson Hocevar and Zane Smith as rookies will have rookie seasons. And when you look at Kyle Busch's rookie season at Hendrick, and he won a couple of races, but was still 20th in points. That was before you had the playoff system. So, Spire certainly isn't where Hendrick Motorsports is. So if Hocevar and Zane Smith can run, 25th in points, I think that's not a horrible result for them with some occasional top 15s and occasional top 10s. When you look at the truck side, you have drivers who still are trying to prove themselves, and Chase Purdy, Raja Caruth, um, and then you have Nick Sanchez running as the Rev Racing Alliance driver. So, I think it's going to be one of those, that's going to be stepping stones. And that's going to be, can these drivers who have shown some promise, but need to show improvement? Or are they going to be able to show that and just how quick?
Yeah. Who are some of the drivers in Xfinity and trucks that you could possibly see heading up to Cup next year?
Ooh, next year, um, I think it's hard to say. I don't know that how many would be ready for next year. Chandler Smith, you could argue, could possibly be ready. There was some chatter about whether he could go cup racing this year. Um, you have obviously Austin Hill is ready. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but he kind of likes that home he has at RCR. And if RCR wanted to start a third cup team, I think he would be somebody people would be looking at right away. And then, I mean, SVG is going to probably be, if he does decent at all, I would say that he would be in Cup next year if Trackhouse can find a spot for
Yeah. And then last thing, of course, with the season kicking off, what are we going to expect for this Daytona 500?
him. I think it's gonna be wild like it usually is. I think again, it's hard to know until you watch the duels and see potentially how they work things. I think you're going to see a lot of manufacturer working together, especially when it comes to pit road and them all pitting together and trying to save fuel and just all trying to work together. I think it'll be a little bit of an unknown on whether the new Ford bodies and Toyota bodies have any impact. Did Ford give up a little bit on the super speedways in order to be better at other places? Some say they have, others say they haven't. So I think what you're going to see is kind of a wide open Daytona 500. I don't think there's going to, right now, you can say, well, this make will be better than the other. I think the one thing that we do know is that Hendrick Motorsports typically comes to qualify well, and it's important to them. So, they've kind of owned the pole board there for a while in the front row, and I won't be surprised if they do so again.
Yeah. All right. Bob Pockrass, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, Casey.